How do I build a relationship with a funder before submitting a grant application? That's the topic of today's video. Maybe more importantly, we should discuss why we should do this. Building relationships with funders before you submit a grant application is a critical step in the grant getting process. If you have a strong relationship with a funder, with individuals involved in the fund review process, the application review process, the fund management cycle, you will have a greater degree of likelihood of receiving that grant. Remember that organizations do not review applications, people review applications. So I'm Benjamin Dean from grantgetting.com. I hope you enjoyed this video and others like it on the channel aimed at helping you get more grants. In the description, there's a link to a free download with 10 proven strategies for building strong relationships with funders. In this video, we're going to cover 3 strategies or 3 ways to begin this process. So there are multiple types of funders, and there are a variety of different ways in which we can categorize them relative to the purpose of a discussion. One of the important delineations in categorizing a funder as it relates to building relationships will be where that funder is located, how big of a geographic scope that funder takes on, and the connections that you have or don't have within that organization in terms of the concentric circles relative to the decision makers, right? If there's a little tiny circle of decision makers for a funder, then you have degrees of separation that you are away from those decision makers. And the closer that you can get to the decision makers in terms of a personal relationship or organizational awareness or organizational understanding, program understanding, the closer you can get to informing and inspiring and connecting with those decision makers, the better relative to the goal of getting grants. So you have some funders that are community focused, that are in your community, that don't fund outside of your community. They work almost purely off of relationships and just wanting to support your neighborhood or your neighborhoods or your zip code or your city or your region, it's kind of smaller areas. Then you have, sort of scaling up organizations like, say, a large multinational bank that has a grant program. And that's going to be much different, but it's going to also afford you the opportunity to potentially connect with those that are locally working, say, for that bank or for that corporation in your community. So there's examples there. And then there's examples of foundations that, let's say, are based in Chicago, Illinois, and you are in Bend, Oregon, and it's just a foundation that has a mission to do something relative to the thing that you are aiming to do. And there's nothing in between. There's not a satellite office. There's not a branch. There's nobody who works for that foundation near you. There's just them out there in, 2 or 3 time zones away, and then there's you, right? So everything we're going to be talking about here is really applicable to all of these scenarios, but of course needs to be thought through when you're approaching different types of funders. Okay, so cold outreach versus warm handoffs and warm introductions, all these sorts of things we can get into more detail. But in this video, we're going to talk about 3 things that are the baseline. And number 1 is research. So understanding the funder thoroughly. Okay, now the more research that you do, the faster you will get at it. And in the initial grant research that you do, you'll identify, again, 20 grants maybe that sound real good, sound like, that we would be we would be a good fit for this grant opportunity. And then you're going to go through whatever process you have or whatever process you're using that I or others are articulating for how to prioritize those grants or whatever software you're using to do that. And then eventually you're going to come down to, this is the grant that I'm going to write. This is the application that I'm going to write for this funder. Then you're going to go into a deeper dive than you did before. So building a relationship with the funder starts with understanding. You have to seek to understand where a funder is coming from, both organizationally and individually. Okay, both the organization and its stated objectives and mission and track record, all of that, as well as the individuals that are actually the ones doing it. So understanding both of them. And before you reach out, it's essential to understand what this funder and individual care about. Now, you're not going to know necessarily the individual. Let's say it's a typical situation would be an employee that has been hired by the organization to manage grant applications in this philanthropic arm of the foundation, let's say. And they are sort of the first gatekeeper. You're not going to know that person's individual priorities until you get to know them, but you certainly can do a lot of research on the organization. Now, there may be a way, and there is typically a way for you to find out who is involved in the grant review process to understand, if nothing else, if you already have a connection there, which many times you will, first or second or third degree, to find your way to ask a question or to make some sort of connection. And that would be on the individual side. But overall, on the organizational side, this means understanding their mission, their funding priorities, the types of projects that they do typically support, the stage at which they typically support, the outcomes that they are typically supporting organizations to achieve. This can be done through their website, through the FAQ section, through any webinars that they have done previously in previous grant cycles, which is a great place to find a lot of awesome information before other people do. And so just to double click on that one real quick, many funders will do a webinar or do a Q&A session with potential applicants each year. Not everyone does this, but for those that do, sometimes those are recorded and can be found online, or you can ask for them and you find them. And what you will find in there is a lot of really good questions. And most of the time, year over year, applications don't change, right? You don't want to write the entire application before it comes out. You can see the difference. But if you're prepping for an open date, that is a great resource to find out a little bit more about how you might strategize this particular application. Other ways to do research is to reach out to other nonprofit groups that have previously been awarded funding from this organization and ask them questions about what this organization cares about, what they're interested in, how to best communicate, any advice that they can have, because you're really looking to get funding from this organization. Most of the time, if you're direct, folks will take 10 or 15 minutes to have a phone call or pop off an email with some highlights that can spin up your knowledge base or otherwise flatten your learning curve on the research. So this all gets into a lot, of course, aligning your project with the funder's intentions for the money that they are hopefully giving to you. So when you approach a funder, and we'll talk about how and different ways to do that in the next point. But when you approach a funder, you don't want to approach them with a blank notebook. You want to approach them with a notebook already filled with notes, right? You want them to know either physically in a meeting, if you have a physical meeting, or through a phone call or through an email or through a Zoom call, a video conference call, that you have done your research. That gets people's attention. When somebody comes to a meeting or any form of communication and has already thought through the basic questions and has more in-depth questions, more specific questions, that is a big green light, green flag. This is somebody that really cares, that is taking us seriously as a funder, and they're paying attention to me, I'm going to pay attention to them. It's a reciprocation thing. It's a psychological thing that works, that is just respectful. And, it works in the sense of getting someone's attention. When you research somebody, when you're paying attention to somebody, they are more likely to pay attention to you. You can also look at social media, and you can also look at press releases. Direct press releases sometimes are the best way because it's a distillation of the things that organization cares most about. There's a lot of things going on social. There's a lot of different priorities for a website that need to be thought about. So if you have a press release being written by that organization, generally speaking, people from multiple departments have gotten together and said, we need to distill this information to exactly what we want to communicate about our brand. Press releases are not always just, hey, let's get the word out about this new grant or this annual grant that we have coming out. It's also a means that that organization can market themselves to differentiate themselves among their competitors, right? So within that, you're able to sometimes glean something that you wouldn't be able to glean otherwise. All of this is taken into account, this detailed knowledge, to show that you've taken the time to understand their work, which makes a wonderful first impression, however the communication is. Now, that's number one. Number two is communicate effectively. And I would also say consider comprehensive communication. So after you've done your research, and let's say this is somebody that you've never met, you don't really have a connection to, it's more of a third party, organization name, and that's all you know. The Benjamin Dean Foundation. You don't know Benjamin, you don't know anything about them as individuals, you just know that they give grants, and based on all your research, you're a potential good fit. So you're reaching out for what? Why would you reach out? Now, you can't reach out and say, hey, we are applying for this grant coming out next month, and we just wanted to touch base and say hello and introduce ourselves. That's very friendly and kind of you, but unless it is a local funder or a more micro-regional funder, it's probably not going to be super well received or prioritized because people have lives and people have jobs. And their jobs are to do whatever is on their job description. And in the case of a grant manager, many times they are not charged with community outreach. Sometimes they are, and you can look for that to make those more open-ended communications. But most of the time, these are administrators, very competent administrators that have been chosen to manage a process. These are process managers. And so you need to speak that language. You need to ask direct questions. So as you're doing your research and as you're beginning to look at how does my project, program, or initiative apply to this organization, there may be things that fit very clearly and maybe things that you're not quite sure if this is the right fit in terms of maybe outcomes or in terms of the type of funding that you need. You need a piece of equipment. And although it isn't specifically said that equipment is ineligible in terms of an expense item, you look at the previous funding cycles and you don't see equipment on there, that is a great question, right? You have read between the lines and found something that is unclear to you, right? And that would be a question for the grant administrator. And that's a question that you can ask before the open date. Okay, so part of communicating effectively is understanding that many people, many grant writers will wait to do any research until the grant is open, which means they are only going to be asking their questions during the open season. Now, in some cases, that's just fine. There's no issue with that. And you're not going to get knocked points for asking a question during a grant cycle. But it's certainly beneficial to you to reach out to an individual when their workload is less. You're more likely to get a meeting. You're more likely to get a longer meeting. You're more likely to get more attention. Okay, if you just imagine that you're managing a grant application process and you've got, say, 200 applications and you're, maybe going to give away 15 or 20 grants, 10% or so, you've got to chop out 90%, right? And if you're a grant administrator, grant manager in that sense, reviewing or somehow organizing these applications, so that's your mindset. Your mindset is you really want to be picking the best ones. And if you are only reaching out in the middle of a application, an open application cycle, then you're sort of missing that opportunity. Now, to take that even further, where you really don't want to be reaching out is towards the deadline because that's where everybody else is reaching out. So communicating effectively is not just how well you speak or what words you choose. It is also your planning. Okay, so part of a best practice would be to plan for open dates, not plan for closed dates. Right? Now, if you're the type of person that says to themselves, well, I really thrive under pressure. I really like having deadlines because I work better. I've historically found that I work better. That I totally understand and know people that have said that, and I myself have probably said that in the past. Well, if that's the case, then a goal of communicating effectively might dictate that you just make up your own deadline and self-impose a different deadline that's 1 month earlier or some degree of many weeks or many months earlier than the actual deadline and work towards that. That is going to benefit you tremendously. Okay, so again, thinking about organizations don't review applications, people review applications. Okay, so another part of communicating effectively is, of course, choosing the right medium. All right, so right now, the easiest way and the most common way that people are communicating with each other in this setting is over email. Emails are the easiest thing to ignore because they are the easiest things to send. It is most common that a grantor or a funder would have an email address. It might be just generic inquiries at ourfoundation.org, right? That inbox is going to be slammed with stuff, with spam, with, all sorts of stuff because it's going to get scraped up by all these different data scraping services. So that's not your best route. That is a route. And if there is no other route, there is, but let's just imagine there wasn't. It's better to do that than nothing. But you got to think, what's going to get attention? What gets attention now is a phone call and a physical letter. Okay. Those two things get more attention now because everybody is going online and they're going to their email and they're just popping off emails. That is what gets attention. So I'm not saying don't email because you can have wonderful conversations and meaningful conversations over email. That's not what I'm saying. Most of your conversations will end up being over email. But if we're talking about this initial outreach, where you're trying to make a connection and or you want to say thank you and or any sort of initial contact. Email is okay, but if you can get on the phone with somebody, leave a message, you don't hear back in a couple days, you send a physical letter, you send an email, you find, I would say fourthly, you find the social accounts of the individuals or the organization. You pop them a kind message. Hey, I just sent an email. I didn't get a response. I just wanted to respond here because I'm really excited to talk with somebody. Or I just sent a voicemail. I just left a voicemail, right? So you don't need to be afraid to communicate too much so long as you're communicating broadly across multiple mediums. And then, of course, that you actually have a specific question to ask, like we talked about. Okay, so that's a big part of it. Another part on communication, and this is a huge topic, that this one point here is not touching everything on communication, but these are some things that will help you get thinking about it, is that there is the direct communication that we're talking about. It's like, here is a grant database that says, here's a grant opportunity. You research it, you prioritize it, it comes to the top of the list, and now you're like, what are all the strategies that I have to communicate and to increase my likelihood of getting this grant, and communicating effectively is part of that, right? There's that because it's targeted towards this upcoming open date or potentially close date. So there's that sort of communication, which is direct. But then part of a grant writer or a grant getter is to set an organization up for sustainable success. And one of the ways that you are going to be able to do that is to not only have you sitting at your computer or at your desk, making phone calls, writing letters, whatever you're doing, but to also empower others to do the same, to network on your behalf, and or to create awareness about your organization that speaks to those individuals or those organizations that isn't a direct outreach, creating organizational awareness. Okay, so for most organizations, much of your funding will come locally and regionally. So your marketing campaigns, your social media account management, your press release strategy, your interviews that you're conducting, mailers that are going out, networking events that you're attending, all of these things are different opportunities for you to talk about the things that matter relative to the funding sources that you are eventually going to be prioritizing and applying for. So as you're doing this research, you're going to be researching, hopefully, not just one organization, and that's it. You will come to a point of diminishing returns on your research, and then you'll go to the next one. You'll do your research and you'll research what you believe is, the critical amount to understand. You'll go to another one. You'll have this log. You may also have a historical log of grantors that you've worked with in the past. And if you take a step back and you look at this, you say, well, we've got about 25 funders here. They generally really care about this, this, and this. These are the top three things. It just so happens that we have three messaging points that we can put out there over many months or even many years into the community that helps to reinforce these decision makers that our organization is the right organization to invest in. Okay, that is effective communication. I don't think I'm that old, but maybe I am. But in my in my education, the idea is integrated marketing communications. That was actually the name of my major in college, integrated marketing communications. And so that is a mindset that and strategies and tactics along the way that says all of your communications, all of the ways in which that you communicate to stakeholders or constituents in your community, in your outreach group should be integrated, should be from the same voice, or at least talking about the same things. Okay, so that's part of communicating effectively. Okay, the last point here is thinking about and demonstrating organization's value, your organization's value. Funders will need to see that your organization is capable and credible. One of the best ways to build strong relationships is by getting their attention and showcasing that your organization's impact is there, that you have it, that it is able to be demonstrated, and share previous successes. The one common error that I'll bring up here is this idea that I'm asking for money because things aren't going well. I don't want people to perceive us to be successful, because if they perceive us to be successful, then they won't give us money. Almost always not the case. Almost always incorrect whatsoever. For the most part, grant funders want to fund successful organizations. Okay, there may be exceptions to this that are like an individual family foundation that's very much driven, sort of emotionally, an emotional connection, a different set of priorities than you might say in terms of outcome focused. But for grantors that are outcome focused, you better believe that they want organizations that can achieve outcomes, which means if you're successful, you want to highlight it. If you have successes, you want to highlight those. Okay, that is demonstrating your capacity and that is demonstrating your value. Okay, so you always want to think about, you want to add value to this funder. It is not a take relationship. You are not taking money and, oh, thank you, funder, for this money. Oh, bless us all that we have received this great gift. No, this is a contract. You are in a transactional relationship. They're giving you money so that you give them something back that is worth that much money or more to them. Okay, so the mindset that you are a charity, and maybe a more derogatory sense of the word, is not an awesome mindset all the time to have when you're writing grants. You are a professional organization that does business in your community, and your business is achieving these outcomes. That's what you do. You're just going to do it. And you want their money and you want their support and resources and other things because it's a great fit. It's something that you want. It's something that we want. We're going to do this together. It's a partnership in that sense of the word. Okay, so that's a bit of a mindset thing, but it all has to do with demonstrating value. Now, that's sort of an organizational value idea. The other value idea is, how do you add value right now? So as to say, you want to receive funding from an organization. Those individuals within that organization are the ones that are going to make the decisions. So what can you do to get their attention? What can you do to add value right now? Well, one of the most successful things that I have done over the course of my career is to make introductions for the funder. So if you can understand that who you know is actually more important than what you know, that's going to benefit you greatly. If you can understand that truly who you know is more important than what you know, or at least have that mindset, you can get to the point of adding value to any funding organization. Okay, and you do this by making recommendations, by making introductions, by making referrals to other individuals that other organizations might see as a competitor. So here's where an idea of where it might tie together. And this will just get your brain thinking about this. You don't have to do this exact thing. But let's say you're an organization that achieves some sort of health outcome, and you've got a few employees, and you're working along, and you're looking at additional grant opportunities. There's likely in your community other organizations that are doing similar work that are much further along than you, much more sophisticated, bigger staffs, bigger boards, more funding, all of these things. They've just been doing it longer. They've been more successful for whatever reason. Well, if you do really solid grant research, broadly and deeply on particular grantors, one of the things you can do is you can reach out to that particular organization that is multiple steps ahead of where you are. And you can say, hey, have you heard of this organization? Have you applied for funding before? And let's say they say no. Well, you might have already started a conversation with that organization about something on their application. Well, now you have the opportunity to connect an organization that is further along than you and maybe has a better chance of getting funding than you on paper with the organization that is looking for that opportunity. You could do something like set up a group phone call or a group Zoom between the three of you where you can ask questions, that other organization in your community can also ask questions. This adds tremendous value to the funder. You can also just do an email introduction and say, hey, I've talked with you, Funder A, about a few things, and I really wanted to connect you with this amazing organization in our community doing awesome work. They may have a couple more questions for you. And you make that email introduction. Okay? That is one way. Email introductions are a great way to get to the top of an inbox. Okay, even though it's not directly for your organization, you have added value. So the ability for you to do this does take for you to have the mindset that doing good things for other people is the right thing to do, and it also reciprocates itself in some way or another. So if you can constantly be adding value to funders, you will find your success rate, generally speaking, is going to somehow magically rise up, right? This isn't going to be direct. This is not a direct thing. This is a long-term strategy for an organization to have more clout, to have more credibility, to have more respect among the funders, individual funders out there in your space. Okay, so those are some tips on adding value. So I hope this was helpful. Down in the description, there are 10 strategies for doing this sort of relationship building work. And it is a topic that I can probably do 100 videos on and go deeply on dozens of different topics relating to relationship building, because it is what I have seen one of the things that contract grant writers fail at, or fail at more than succeed at. And that is, it's not just about a great application, it's about person-to-person connection. So thank you for jumping in. Check out that free download. If you have any struggles with relationship building or any questions, pop them in the comments below, and I would love to respond there. Thank you so much, and we'll see you in the next video.